motives for reading a book. One, that we simply enjoy it. And the other one is that we can boast about it. I'm sure the audience would agree with me when I say that there is something magical that happens when you read a good book, where we sense a conversation with the finest people around. With a great zeal of pride and privilege, I, Sindhu Panika, welcome you all to this first edition of Nahar Jito Bookathon in association with Raisoni Foundation, where we dive deep into the world of literature and creativity. When the entire world was lost about what next during COVID and its lockdown, very few could think, explore, carry out on what next. Some thought of their hobbies and some on their passion. Well, it was to do with discovering or rediscovering whatever we call that as. But the truth is that COVID situation did not hinder something called as creativity, where people who understand the importance of time would always utilize all the opportunities possible. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us one such persona who added a new feather to his crown during the lockdown with his debate yet impressive writing, where he asserted that hope is the most powerful fuel that drives us. We are glad to have with us Mr. Ameya, a fabulous author of the book The Rock Babas and Other Stories, a book of short stories published by Amazon and sold in over 40 countries globally. He's an entrepreneur, Managing Director of Napa Capital Advisors Private Limited and New Age Financial Advisors Private Limited and partner UAP Advisors LLP. Apart from this, he is the director at Miracle Feet Foundation, vice chairperson of Konkan Krida Prabodhini, and a board member of the Climate Group. Mr. Ameya has been designated as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and is also a published writer and columnist. Thank you, Mr. Ameya Prabhu. Your book yokes together all the impossible colors of the rainbow. We could call that as a map of human frailties and resilience. Also, I'm sure that the readers across the world would have thoroughly enjoyed the diversities used in illustrating the themes, where that 9 stories included people from various religions, communities, and races. So before we start with the interaction about the stories, I wish to hear from you on the intriguing and captivating title, The Rock Babas and Other Stories. So what made that book to be named as this?
Thank you so much, Sindhu, for the question, and again, thank you so much for having me on this wonderful platform at the inaugural Nahar Jito Bookathon. I think reading is as you beautifully said, reading is something that can be captivating and fulfilling at the same time. And I think the fact that Nahar Jito is organizing this bookathon, having various authors, shows the Jain religion looks inwards and looks at enhancing our inward beauty as as a part of the thesis of the religion. And I think Jito doing that for the books and for readers, I think that's really a fantastic thing. Going back to what you said about about the book, so The Rock Babas is one of the 9 short stories in the book. So when I was writing and I was discussing with my editor as to what should we name the book, so we thought of various ideas. Maybe we should call it something, an anthology of short stories, like a generic name, and then, while going through the list of the titles of each of the 9 stories, my editor was like, I really like the name The Rock Babas. Why don't you use that as, The Rock Babas and Other Stories as a part of the 9 stories? And The Rock Babas is the title story now, and it's actually the story I first thought of while conceiving the book. So I think it's probably fitting that it's named after that story. And as you have read, the Rock Babas are a bunch of mythical holy men living up in the Himalayas, playing rock music and connecting with the higher being, God, whatever we want to, however we want to define it. And so that's who they are. And I think that's one of the stories. That's why we decided to name. I think it's quite a catchy name as well. So
Yes.
Ultimately, when you are doing anything which is writing a movie or anything which needs to captivate the attention of the audience, I think having a catchy title is quite important. So I think that was something, one of the reasons we chose this. But I guess, as I said, it's fitting because it was the first story that I thought of while writing the book.
All right. So, first thing is about how captivating the name is, and the second thing, that's the first story that you started.
Correct, correct. Both those points added
We needed to
to
be
the.
the title.
But we did consider. I mean, I must be honest with you. Like while naming the book, for me was a lot harder than writing the book because I think while writing you have we write in a flow, but when it comes to decide what to name it, I think the
Requires a
namer's
lot of
block was a lot
brains.
more than writer's block.
True, true. So now getting into the book. So each character in your book, right from the aging tycoon to the special agent, faces like some unique and profound challenges. So can you discuss, the process for developing these diverse characters? So was that kind of a research, or if it's like some personal experiences that inform their creation? So what would you also hope your readers will learn from the ways these characters navigate their struggles?
Sure. No, I think I'll take a step back, and I think what's important is to understand the context at which the book was written. I think, as you rightly said, that it was written during COVID. It was during the lockdown. I was stuck in Mumbai all alone in my place, and and I think, of course, it was a very challenging time for the world. But I think one thing which I had for the first time was time. I had the luxury of time at my hands, which I did not have for a long time. So I decided to use that time. And I think one thing again, COVID taught us is irrespective of race, religion, caste, creed, social, economic background, I think it affected everybody, right? And and I think birth and death in that sense are great levelers because all of us, no matter who we are, go through both these phenomena. So that really got me thinking. And, we try to be so divisive. We devise on the basis of race, economic background, religion. But if we are all the same, if we bleed, we all of us eat, we all of us sleep, all of us, procreate, all of us. If you stab us, we will bleed. So I think what was important is to give a message of unity, to give a message of uniformity, and to showcase that you might think that a rich man is happier than a poor man, but rich and poor are just monetary constructs. But in some cases, maybe the poor man has family, and the rich man probably doesn't. So who knows who's happier? Because happiness is a very individualistic concept. So I think when I was building these characters, what I wanted to showcase, and if you see the stories are based all over the world, both of all genders, are people from various socioeconomic backgrounds, various religions, various cultures. And it was all done on purpose to showcase that no matter who you are, from where you are, what you do go through trials and tribulation. And of course, they were set in a context of a lot of subcontext, right? So you mentioned Agent Holder. There's a very strong element of racial bias that comes in the United States against African Americans. So that was the context there. If you see the story of Man with the Beard, which is based in Colombia and which also has a long history of socio-economic issues, when it comes to plantation workers versus, the global multinational cooperatives, which, buy the fruit and grow the fruit. The case study of United Fruit Company is quite prevalent and quite known to us. If you look at the story of the Rainbow Prince, which is a Arab prince, and of course there are socio-cultural issues, there are father-son issues, and of course there's also a very strong issue of Islamophobia, which comes in, within that. And again, one thing which I have always had because I have a lot of friends from the Arab world, that while we all look at them through a certain construct, but there is a lot of ethnicities within the Arab, with the tribal politics, ethnic politics, sectarian politics, which also comes in. So again, the Arabs have a saying, which is, "Me and my brother are against my cousin. Me and my cousin are against the world." So, point is, at every time we want to divide. So, I think the book was a story of unity. It was the exact opposite showcase. And in terms of developing characters, I think when you are writing, it's a sum product of a lot of things. It's a sum product of experience. It's a sum product of research. So I did research a lot, for each of these characters, there's a humongous amount of research that went into it. Agent Holder being a classic example, because he's he's a member of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and and it's actually quite a crime sort of a story as well. So a lot of the ballistics, a lot of the the deductiveness, the deduction that went into that, a lot of that also involved research. So yes, I mean, I think someone asked me that what goes into writing a book, and I always say it's 10% creativity, 50% research, and balance is discipline. I think creativity is the smallest element of writing a book or doing anything creative. It's a lot of research, a lot of discipline, and I think that's what this comes out of.
And I mean, what readers will learn from these characters when they navigate their struggles? Like one point that you had referred telling, being happy does not have a direct connect with the money always, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that is a time when we all had our own struggles, may it be financial, may it be in terms of our health, many things. So these characters, when the readers will get into to understand. So what is one thing that the readers will understand from this?
I have a slightly different view on. I think as a creator, you could be an author, you could be a poet, you could be a writer, a singer, you could be a movie maker. You present art to the world. What they understand, what they take of it, is each and every person's own journey with that art, right? I think that's the. I mean, I'm sure there are certain people who've taken a very philosophical lesson out of the book. There are other people who've just read it at a very international, global, sort of a book. There are other people who've read it for what it is, a book. They don't get that involved, in terms of that. So each and every person has taken a different, takeaway from the book, and I think that's fine. I think that's probably the journey that each person wants to have. But coming back to what you said, so the first story, in terms of money is not happiness, is the classic definition of that, right? The accidental philanthropist, which is about Takashi Watanabe, a Japanese very successful billionaire who's very wealthy but not very liked, and his entire story with that. So I think each story deals with a theme, in terms of one is but again, of course, the underlying link to all of them is also I would say, a deeply embedded belief in spirituality and the ability of one's mind and one's grit to overcome these challenges, or overcome the biases, or overcome the trials and tribulations that one is faced with. But again, as an author, what the reader takes away from it, I want the reader to have their own unique journey. And I must say, like, I've had some phenomenal conversations with people who've read the book. Each and every person probably has taken some very different things out of it.
So can you share any feedback or any anecdotes from readers that surprised you or made you see your stories in a new light?
Sure. No, I think firstly, what surprises me a lot is, I mean, in random parts of the world where I'll meet someone who's read my book. I think I was recently, I was in France, and I had a friend's friend has read my book. I was one of my, again, a random one of my friend's partners. I mean, his girlfriend is Japanese, and her professor from Berkeley recommended the book. I mean, she lives in Tokyo. So for me, and it's such a small world that her professor from Berkeley and recommended, and this friend of mine went to college with me. So I think it's very heartening to have readers in so many countries who've read your book and who give you feedback. And I think the other thing which like what I found very, like, again, now travel, like, so Rock Babas was based in Nepal. So I had a few friends who read my book who went to Nepal, and they actually said we lived our journey through your book. So that's what I meant. At one level, it's more of an international travel book in that
Yeah.
sense. And I've had friends, a story which is not often spoken about is, for example, the Broken Nightingale, which is about a very famous actress, singer who at one point was at the height of a game, and at the end of it was singing in weddings, and her fall from grace. And in her case, unfortunately, she was not able to meet up to the challenges that life threw at her. I wanted that to be, it's maybe a bit of a sad story, I would say, but I also wanted to show that sometimes not everybody wins, and we should also celebrate the ones who don't win. And I had people who because they fought. She may not have won, but she fought, and in her own way, fighting was winning, right? So in a war, when you have a battle, not everybody makes it at the end, but we also celebrate those who fall in battle, right? So I think this was probably a story of celebrating someone who fought and had a tough, challenging life, but at the same time, that valor that she showed was something. So this is a story which one of my aunts came up to me, and she really related with that, because she's like, I have a lot of friends who, not everyone's a hero. Some people, but maybe being a hero is not about the outcome, but maybe hero is a part of the process. So I think it's important to celebrate even those who fight. So I think that's one thing which, so if someone really related with that, and so that's something that stayed with me.
And your stories span different cultures and like social issues such as racial biases in Georgia and spiritual transformations in the Himalayas. So, how do you ensure? You have talked about your research, but how do you ensure this authenticity and sensitivity in your portrayals of these, varied contexts?
One thing which was, I was a student of, I was in the IB, and then I was a student of economics, politics in England. And one thing which my professors were very strict about was research and referencing your research. So I think that drilled within me the requirement to do an extremely thorough research. I rather not write something than be wrong. So, and I think today, thanks to the tools that we have, with, of course, generative AI was not as relevant when I was writing it, but even with the regular Google search, you have a lot of ability to research in terms of finding out. So you can, sitting in your room, you can actually go and find out a very detailed. You could actually be in, say, Magdalena in Colombia. You could actually relive that entire location. So if you want to describe a farm in Magdalena, Colombia, or a location in Cartagena, or the Blue Mountains in Georgia, you can do that sitting in your living room or sitting in your. That's the beauty of. And I think so, from a geographical perspective, a lot of people, even like from Atlanta, they're like, how do you know all the roads in Atlanta? How do you know them so well? And actually, it was just a byproduct of research sitting, and but it takes time, as I said. Similarly, the whole ballistics analysis that we do for the crime scene in Agent Holder, again, so probably spent 2 days researching various case files, research, and 2 days as in 18 hours a day for 2 days. It's 36 hours, so probably the equivalent of much longer in a regular time period. So I think so a lot of it is research. B is I'm extremely particular about being authentic. So it's important for me not to have anything which does not showcase the right view or the right. And even, for example, now, say a story like The Rainbow Prince, right? And in The Rainbow Prince, a lot of it alludes to, say, the teachings of the Quran, for example, right? So there I had to really research that. It's not I'm a Hindu, so for me, it's not a subject area of knowledge for me. But I did a lot of research, and a lot of my Arab friends, my Muslim friends who read it, were very, very impressed. They're like, you've done so much research that you actually have rightly quoted, parts of the verses which showcase the, for example, which correctly showcase the teachings. For example, that was for me very important. Now, again, going back to, say, a story which is The Broken Nightingale, which we spoke about. Now, that was Bombay in the 60s and 70s, and also pre-partition, West Bengal. So a lot, Bengal, sorry. So a lot of that also required a lot of research. Speaking to people who used to frequent the places in Mumbai in those days. So I think it's because some of this research you won't get online. Now, for example, how Mumbai was in the 60s. Now I had to speak to older people, 70s. I had to speak to older people who knew that part, right? In terms of, so I think it's important to be authentic in your research, because that's the experience you want to give your readers, in terms of, because ultimate, and I think that's a general problem with media today, that people are no longer authentic in terms of what they present. Even a news channel, a newspaper, they're no longer authentic in terms of what they present to their readers, because ultimately it's like this, right? If you go to a restaurant, you trust that the chef is giving you the food which is correct. When your mother gives you a drink, it could be tea, coffee, could be medicine, you know that your mother is you're trusting that she'll never do anything wrong. I think that's the level of trust that a reader should have with the author, or a person who consumes media, which either news media, or digital media, or television media should have. So unfortunately, the trust has eroded, and I think it's important that as an author you uphold that trust. And that's why research is important.
I think you have done a fabulous job when it comes to, because I don't think anybody would even have a question about like how is this or what is this, right? So Special Agent Jackson Holder's story involves like overcoming racial biases to solve a complex homicide case. So what strategies or mindsets does his character use that readers can apply to their own experiences with prejudice and bias?
So it's actually very unfortunate. So you spoke about. So I was very inspired at the time, especially because inspired as another. I was a bit worried about the extent of what uh, uh, let's say some of the let's say police killings that were happening in the U.S. on African Americans, and I think if you see the numbers in the U.S. in terms of the percentage of African Americans incarcerated versus non-African Americans incarcerated, or the probability for an African American to be given a custodial sentence of a certain length versus a non-African American for the same crime. So it's a lot higher for an African American. Same crime, same everything. But if you're African American, the likelihood of you getting a custodial sentence and the length of your sentence are both longer and higher if you're African American as opposed to you not being African American. So I think it's a very clear case of even sometimes unknowing bias. You just in your. So I think it's important that one highlights that. I think it is, and you've seen. So the story actually speaks about a young, and again the story actually starts with a body that is found in a parking lot outside Atlanta, and and is African American. So it's immediately assumed it's like a mob killing or a drug related killing. So the bias doesn't even end when you're dead. The bias continues even after you're.
Yes.
And it actually turns out that the guy was an accountant. A very well-to-do, smart accountant. And I think that's when he starts researching on it. And I think also that if you see the backstory of Agent Holder, of Jackson Holder, his brother is incarcerated, his brother is in prison. So he decides that he wants to chart a different path. He doesn't want to get involved in crime, doesn't want to get involved in drug relay. And again that story turns out that it's not actually gang violence, but it's actually a racial attack on the African American young gentleman by a bunch of white supremacists, which is also something which is, right wing white supremacists are rising now throughout the Western world. So I think that's also a form of racial bias. So again, these are political undertones which are important to showcase. And I think it's also important for Indians because, a lot of us are now rising in the world. A lot of us are doing extremely well. India is now a $4 trillion economy and we'll keep growing. So as Indians get more successful and as parts of the West get less successful, there will be an inherent tension that will build, in terms of that. So now parts of the US are fine, like in California, they're very used to having successful Indians, but probably other parts of the US, parts of Europe, they're not used to having very success. And then, I mean, and by Indians, the same thing applies to Chinese, same thing applies to other people. So, ideally, in an egalitarian world, one would look upon one would go beyond race, one would go beyond, but that's not how the world is. So, I think as an
Yeah,
author, it's important to highlight some of these issues and bring them to the forefront because these are real issues that are facing the world today.
true. So the deposed dictator in your book reflects on his life while in prison. So how do you think this so-called self-reflection can lead to personal growth, even in the most challenging circumstances? So do we have or exercises or practices that you recommend for your readers who want to engage in some meaningful self-reflection?
So, that book, that story actually, now again, regarding how you spoke about how different people take different things, right? So now I'll give you so that story, I wrote it. So it's basically a microcosm. Sorry, it's like a all encompassing character of a bunch of, dictators from the African continent. So there's a bit of Gaddafi, a bit of Idi Amin, a bit of Bouteflika. So it's a mix of everybody, So people often ask me that who is this? I said it's actually everyone. It's like a mix of that. But actually, I wrote it. If you see, the book is written, or the story is written by him as an autobiography. It's called The Autobiography of a Dictator, from prison after he's deposed. And it's actually written in the first person, in the way he views himself. And if you see at the end of the story, I showcase a news article in terms of how the other people view him. So actually, that story was an exercise in delusion, in the sense that what I wanted to actually showcase is that even a dictator who's murdered people, who's done a lot of wrong, probably in his mind thinks he's done right. So in the sense, because I think that if you could be a dictator, you could have imprisoned a lot of people, you could have actually executed a lot of people, very corrupt, destroyed your country, and all of these things is this guy. So there are two themes here, right? Theme number one is nobody starts off as bad. Nobody is inherently a bad person. Of course, there's a nature versus nurture debate that goes on there, and there are parts of your nature which can influence that. But it's like life and circumstance that you face with, and the choices you make as you go down that path lead you to become a certain individual. So you could be good or you could be bad, and I think that's also reflected in the story, The Manifestations of Anpao, about the wolf in the mind. There is a good wolf and a bad wolf. It's about who you listen to. So it's any person listens. You can listen to the good wolf or the bad wolf, and based on that you become, say, maybe a great person or a dictator. And I always believe that even a dictator, when he looks back at his life, probably doesn't think he did bad or did wrong, which of course he did. That's why at the end we showcase the actual truth of it. So it was, from my perspective, the theme number one was showcasing the corruption of innocence, and theme number two is an absolute, it was an exercise in delusion, because the guy is not, in a way, is almost self-reflecting. The guy is almost justifying what he did because he thinks what he did is wrong. But so that was the point of that story. So actually, so again, coming back to how, so some people did take it as self-reflection, other people, so it is actually an exercise in delusion. The guy is deluded. The guy feels that I'm actually right, which he's not, in terms of what he's done. And again, it's also important not only to explore good characters, it's also to explore bad characters, because you need to understand what goes into the mind and what makes a person evil, what makes a person, why do they take decisions that they do. And I would say that I hope people don't empathize with the character of the the autobiography of a dictator, but some people do empathize with it, because in a way, the way he's written it, and that shows you, right, that if even probably if you talk to a dictator and he gives you his own story, possibly you might empathize with it. And and I think that's something which is interesting. That's the human psyche. But coming back on a general answer to your question about self-reflection, so I meditate a lot, and I think I'm sure a lot of the listeners of from Jito also potentially meditate a lot. And I think meditation is very important, because we spend most of our life looking outwards. The only time when we look inwards while we are aware, by that I mean while we are conscious, not asleep, is when we meditate. So I think meditation is a very important part of self-reflection. And I think life is a series of choices that we make. And it's like taking a car and driving, you take a right, you take a left, and then you end up at your destination. But I think it's very important to self-reflect on those choices and look upon them. And I'm sure that if the dictator truly did an honest self-reflection, because the toughest person to face is when you face yourself, because you can lie to the whole world. You can, like, someone says you can be corrupt and nobody will know, but you'll always know. Maybe nobody else will know, but you'll always know. If you've murdered 1,000 people, you'll always know that. If you've incarcerated 10,000 people, you'll always know that. You can manage the media, you can manage, all these global organizations, but you'll always know that. So I think self-reflection is a very important part, and you need not. I mean, even for us on a day-to-day basis, I try to do self-reflection maybe every night or every few days, right? I think maybe you said something to someone unknowingly, maybe that left a bit of a bad taste in someone's mouth. Reflect on that. Maybe do something better the next time. Maybe you could have, maybe you were busy reading a book, or maybe you're busy with your work. Someone asked for something, you ignored them, or maybe you could have done something slightly better. So I think it's important to self-reflect and see how one can, you know, because ultimately it's your karma, it's your energy that you're giving and leaving out there.
As in you rightly said, like it's not going to be the last time. I don't know. I beg to differ when people say that first impression is the last impression. There is always a second impression that can change the first impression, and we taking an opportunity to with proper self-realization is something that's really a
You know,
fantastic.
I will give a metaphor. When you see, it's like this: when you plant a tree or plant whatever, plant a tree or plant any sapling, planting it correctly is very important, because if you plant it incorrectly, the tree or plant may not grow, but it also won't grow if you don't water it. So what I mean by that is your impression or your first interaction is also important, but also the consequent interactions are very important. So I think it's so while you planting a tree has to be done properly, but so both are important. This is my point. But if you don't water the tree, don't give it proper, if you put it in if you don't give it proper sunlight, don't give it proper fertilizer, that is also very important.
Right, like as why I refer that the second impression can always change the first impression is the example that you gave. Like sometimes when you ignore people without knowing that the other person is hurt, so it is always that we can come back and correct it, right?
True.
Okay, and
True.
we could witness from your writing that it's very finely made, that is balancing profound themes with humor and criticism. So, what writing techniques have you used to achieve this balance without, overwhelming the reader? I think, what advice would you give aspiring writers on incorporating deep or thought-provoking themes into their narratives?
I must confess that I'm not a trained writer. So I've actually not studied writing, nor have I done any formal training in writing. Writing for me has been a passion, but I've been writing for a long time. I've been writing since probably I'm 14, 15. So, often when people ask me what are I write as it flows. I think, and I write the way I speak. I try to be honest. I think that. And I think it reflects in the writing. There is a lot of honesty, there's a lot of directness, there's a lot of that's so I always write the way I would speak to you right now. So that's the way I try to write. But from a perspective of tips for writers, see, I'll go back to what I said. Writing is about 10% of talent, maybe 20 in exceptional cases, but a lot of it is research and discipline. I think if you I have a lot of friends who've started books, not finished it, not been able to complete it, and I think a completion of a book is a lot of discipline. So I think if people want to write, definitely be disciplined about writing. Say I want to finish X amount of words in so much time. Number two is and this is not just about your writing, but about anything in life. There's nothing which is perfect. There is no perfect, like even today, like I have my book next to me right now. If I read my book, I'll probably want to change three things about it every time I read it.
True.
So you have to draw a line. And this is not just for a writing, this is for anything. You
Anything.
have to draw a line at some point in time and say, boss, this is done. And now I'm going to put it out to the world. For better or worse, I'm going to expose myself now to the world. And if it goes well, great. And if it's not, I move on to the next one. Or either way, I move on to the next one. There's always tomorrow. A number three is I encourage people to write. It's good, bad, let the world decide. But write for yourself to start with. I always actually wrote for myself, and I had never published any book till this. I've written for the HuffPost, I've written for Quint, and I've published articles. So if you see Ameya, Prabhu, you Google it, you'll find it. But a lot of
Yes.
it were poems, a lot of it were stuff which I used to write. And even for me, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to, expose myself to such public scrutiny, and that self doubt is always there, each and every person. But I think
Yes.
it's important to take that step forward, and be brave, because ultimately when I thought to myself that maybe, and I guess being in COVID helped as well, that maybe whenever is my last breath on this planet, I think I would rather be proud that I took that step and wrote the book than I didn't. And I think this goes for everything we do. But I
Yes.
think in terms of, I think my only tip to people in addition is be authentic. When you write, be authentic, and write yourself. I think there are a lot of tools now like chat gpt, etc., which people can use. But write yourself, because again it goes back to what I said, that you will know. use it for research. See, these are things which you must use for research. Use it for research. Use it for, even honestly, I use the thesaurus, for if I want to use some word which I find it very repetitive. Maybe I want, because sometimes you have writer's block. So use the tools. It's like a calculator, right? Not using a calculator today is stupid. I mean, when we were in school, we didn't have we could not use a calculator, but today one must use a calculator for calculations. But again, the basis that we have is we can do the math in our head. So I think use the tools, but write yourself and be authentic. I think that is most important in terms of writing.
I think the readers were able to connect with this book very easily because, as you said, the way you speak, you just write it. So I think that's the best connect that an author could bring in when we want good readers. I mean, are there any future projects that you're working on that like continuing to explore similar themes of human resilience and transformation? I mean, are you planning to, and do you plan to evolve your writing to keep engaging and inspiring your readers and any new themes or settings that we can look forward in your upcoming works?
So I think there are a couple of paths one can go from here. One of the reasons why I chose short stories was because I find the modern reader is not a very engaged reader. Will a reader today read 1,000-page Anna Karenina? Probably not. I don't know if I would read 1,000-page Anna Karenina. So the reason I chose the format of short stories, which historically was not a very popular format, was because you have 25, 30-page stories. Depending on your speed, you can finish it in 1.5 to 2.5 hours per story. Drop the book, pick it up 2 weeks later, read a new story. So while there is an underarching theme that connects the stories, you don't need to know what happened in, say, part one to know what happened in part two. In terms of that. And even a movie these days, right? We forget, like, Dune 2 was released recently. I'd forgotten Dune 1 already by the time that came in. So that's one of the reasons I chose the format. But as I said, one of two, because I had written a play when I was 16, and I have recently edited and updated that. So one thought process is maybe publish that play as the next step. Number two is there are a couple of themes that I'm working on when it comes to books. But probably we'll choose a different format. Probably we'll go to a novel format, but not a long novel, maybe a 150, 200 page sort of novel format as a next step. Just to try something else, because of that. But and it need not be the same theme. It could be something completely different. I've thought of a few ideas. I've not come upon one yet, because also, if you think of it, in any of the 9 stories that I wrote, could them in their own be a novel, could also in their own be a longer, and there are some stories people liked a lot, like they liked the Rock Babas, they liked the Accidental Philanthropist, they liked the Manifestations of Anpa, which is one of my favorite stories. I think they also like The Shepherd. I think that's a story not very often spoken of, which is about the priest. And so it's all, and again, it's again about morality, right? I mean, we often say that the priest is more moral, and say there's a prostitute in the story who's immoral. But in the story, you actually see that the prostitute is a lot more moral in terms of her moral compass than the priest is by the end of it. So I think as it again goes back to that initial theme that I said, right? A rich man may not be happy, a poor man may not be sad. So I think it's important to, let's say, let go of our preconceived biases that we have about people, and understand, because people are also a product of their circumstance, very often.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ameya Prabhu. I'm sure the success of your book has been reaching greater heights just by its ability to inspire others to be like happy, positive, and brave. We look forward to have many such inspiring writings from you in the future. And thank you so much once again for taking time and joining us. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Sindhu, and again, thank you to Nahar Jito for having me, and I look forward to more such occasions to interact with the audience. Thank you.
Pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Ameya Prabhu on his book, The Rock Babas and the Other Stories. Thank you all once again for joining us in this first edition of Nahar Jito Mukaton. Until we meet you next time, take care. Goodbye.